We're going to continue with our folding carton. This will be for doing a 3D rendering. So we have all our texture maps into position. All our art is on here. I have these set all to matte. So there's no reason to do any kind of material alterations or reflectivity up in our materials dialog. The one thing I did do is I set up this round surface here. It's not a piece of geometry, so you can make it round, you can make it square, you can make anything you want. It's the reflective quality that I gave it. It's called Catcher. See if I can find it. Where did I, okay, here it is. So it's plain color, just white. Under reflection, it's called Catcher. So its options, all it has is it's a reflective quality and it has shadow intensity. So you can control how much shadow would be put on this. So this is designed for making these reflective surfaces under objects because you won't see the object. So you can control the shadow and you control the reflectivity. I kept the shadow off and I'm using just the reflective part for that. So I have that set at 20%. So I'll just render this really quickly here so you can see how that works. I have my lighting set up and everything like that, but I'm going to show you how I did that because it all relates. So all this really does, and you can see it just comes to an end at the end of that circle. But I'm going to render this, and then I'm going to feather this out in Photoshop after I'm done. So that's how that was created. So we have that. So we need to start off with setting up the size of our page, which is our image options. This particular one, I'm going to set this up at 8.5 by 11. Relatively small, but that'll sit nice and tight on there. 300 DPI. So that's the size of that image. So when I do render, my full rendering will be this 8.5 by 11. So the next thing we need to do is set up our perspective. So if we go under display and not display, under view, and go to 2-point perspective. There is 3-point, but that can give us a little bit of a keystoning. It's hard to see it right here, but it'll give us that third, see how the blue line is going from side to side. I don't particularly like to use that, especially with small objects, because it makes things look like buildings. It's really designed for a larger project, larger items. So we'll do 2-point, and I'm just going to pull this in a little bit. So the perspective is there, but what we need to do is work with the cone of vision. So if we go under view again, get this thing out of the way. Under view, and we have edit cone of vision. So here, the top right, that's what's in our main screen. These other views are top left and right of what the cone of vision looks like. So essentially, this black dot here is our eye point, our head, our eyes. And then we have this big cone. So we can move the cone around. So I'm just going to back this off a little bit and go back and forth and show you how to manipulate this. So I'm going to come over here on the bottom right. And if I grab our viewpoint, I can move that down. So you can see my object going up and down. So this takes a little practice to figure out how to go back and forth and get this to work. So I'm just going to move the whole thing over and get the arrow head. I know this is a little small, but I'm going to go back and forth and get that larger. So I'm going to pull this to the front slightly and go like this. So to go back to our main screen, go back under view, and then deselect edit cone of vision. So we're back to here. Now we can also manipulate this with our keys here at the start, our set view here interactively. So we can move this around. It's a little less control of the cone of vision, but we can manipulate this and we can go in and out. We don't want to necessarily see that circle. That's just going to be our reflective surface. So I can move in. Now you can see I have quite a bit of perspective here. So in small objects, we really don't want too much convergence. So that's a little bit much, but I can start to move this around. So it's a matter of playing. Everything will be a little different. Depends on your object, what you're trying to show, how you want to show it. So once you set up that view, you can go down into your views. My little dialogue here is at the very bottom. And I have several views set up here. So all you have to do is click on the plus sign, and it'll give you a new view number. And then when you like that, you click on this front area where this red dot would be. And then when you click on that, it'll kind of zoom in and out for a second, and it'll hold that view and save it for you. So I have set up this view. just for this tutorial here. So I have, so all I have to do is name it. And if I click right here, it goes right to that view. So I know I have this nice and tight because I'm not doing anything with backgrounds. I usually do my renderings with a white background, just a little bit of reflectivity, sometimes some shadows. Because quite often I'll crop it out, I'll put it on another page, I'll put it together with other images. So I don't really want to deal with backgrounds. Backgrounds are really nice and they can make the renderings beautiful, but I don't particularly use them that much. So here's my point of view. It's set up for this page size is 8.5 by 11. So this is ready to go with those two things. The next thing to do is the lighting. And this can be a little challenging. So I have my lights. Those three little arrows are my lights, and under my lights, I have the dialogue. So each one of these that has the little eye illuminated is the lights. There's one up here called ambient. Double click on ambient, and its dialog box comes up. Again, it has location and things like that, but it's basically just a general light. It's ambient light is in our environments. It's just the kind of the light that's around. It's not necessarily come from a certain direction. It's not the sun. It's not a light bulb. It's just general illumination. So you can control that. It usually comes up at about 30. I usually back off on it a little bit until depending on what I'm doing. So that's the ambient light. So these other two are three lights. I have my top light. I'm going to just open up the page size here so we can, where am I? Display image options. So we can see a little better. Okay, so like I said, there are the arrows. So if we look at that from the top view, we had set this up in the very beginning when I gave you that tutorial on just setting up your space. Now we brought it, you created the three lights, and we generally put it into this position. That's just to get started. That's to prepare for this, because otherwise you're just going to have the sunlight and you have to bring it all in. So I have this, this light right here. This is my top light. I know it's a little hard to see. So I'm just going to click on that. If you select any one of these lights, the little check mark will come up, and I know that's light 6. I can double click on that, and its parameters will come up. So there's different kinds of lights. We can do a whole series of different things here. These are all distant lights. In general, that will work pretty well for just about everything. Intensity, 85%. Quite often I'll do my top light, my main light at about 100%. Location, you can determine its exact location numerically. I just do it intuitively, so I don't use that. Shadows, I'm not using too much shadow on this, but I do have it on soft mapped. I prefer soft mapped and the quality on high. And then softness, I'll put anywhere from like 30 to 60%. If you do hard shadows, you get very hard ray traced shadows, which can be fine. It's like a certain kind of effect. But in general, I'll just use that. So that's all, every light has that. So these other two lights, I usually back off on them. So the intensity would probably be 70, it's a bit less. And shadows, I just have them turned off. Quite often it can be very confusing with 3 or 4 lights and they're all giving shadows. You'll have shadows all over the place. I'd go for simplicity and cleanliness. So we're just looking at our object and then we don't have all this confusion around it. But that's just my approach. It's all good. So these are the 3 lights. These I have put into position. So I'll show you what happens when you move them around. So this is my top light. These other 2 are relatively horizontal to our plane. And I have one coming in from the back because my point of view is over here to the right slightly. And then I have this other one facing towards the front, but slightly on an angle. So it takes a little practice to figure out how to do that. So let's, now I'm just in plain gray shaded. So if you go interactive gray shaded, which is the full shaded, I'm going to click on that. That gets rid of the line. So we have a little bit more accuracy. It's not quite full render zone yet. I just want to show you what happens when we move one of these lights. So here you can see, let's get to my move tool. If I look at the object, you can see how the lighting is changing just by how I'm moving this around. You can adjust your lights by looking at this interactively and do this. I quite often will just intuitively figure it out, and then I'll click into render zone to see exactly how it's going to look. So that takes a little practice. So I'm going to undo that because I like where it is. So now I'm going to go back into image options. go back into parameters I had, and then all I have to do is select my view. No, what am I doing? Where'd my views go? Sometimes these dialog boxes get pushed all the way to the bottom and they leave. So I usually have to take away some of them. So there's my point of view with that lighting set up, and I have my background. So all you have to do is on the top here, click on the last rendering option, which is render zone. And that's the rendering. So this is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of reflectivity going on. It's just our texture maps, but it's a nice point of view. It's very clean. We can see that. The graphics look very bright and pronounced. Subtle little shadow because I have these panels on the front. So I would just take this and save this out. Save it out as a JPEG. Export image under here, under file, and then you can go to JPEG and just name it and save it out. So that's that. And I have other points of view. So your box, depending on how theatrical or interesting it is, you might have other points of view. So I do have another one. I'm going to set up the image options because it's a bigger image. So I'm just going to set this up before I go over there. I have this 1117, so I have it horizontal. So this box opens up. So this is the closed version. So I'm trying to go to another layer. So what you do is use these layers. So once you set up your, let's call it the closed orientation, your box, you do a rendering of it, take a copy of it and move it to another layer. So you can save this, you can always go back to it. So I have my Momet close, this is production art, and I have one that's open. So this is, I brought the file over and I opened up the panels. So you have to go, to your 3D geometry, select your panels, hinge them open, and pivot them open until you get to a point of view that you like. So it takes a little. I started off by doing this nice and square from the top view. So I basically folded out my two little side panels. I brought in those little triangular gussets that came in from my die line because I built that afterwards, brought them in and pushed them into geometry. And then the two outer panels, I moved this one a little bit less than this one because I know I'm going to do this point of view that comes in from the right. So I kind of want to show all that. So it's a little bit of back and forth, but setting these all up. Now the art on these two flaps had the outside art on it. So what I had to do is I had to map the inside art on these two curved panels on the left and the right. So I did that separately. I opened them up flat, mapped the art in just like we did the other art last time, and then I snapped them back into position and then pivoted them so they would work. So this is now going to fit in this orientation, and I don't remember which view I used. 6 maybe? Yeah, how about that? Okay, so here's my point of view. I had saved it was view 6. I didn't label it, so I didn't remember. So here's a nice point of view. We can see the geometry. I want to see how the box is made a little bit, and we can see all the panels opened up. So this is what I would use to render that. And I also have this background set up with the reflective surface. So the last thing we need to talk about is, in this particular one, is the actual product. This particular product is this small little bottle. So let me go find my bottle. And there it is sitting. So this is a fully done geometry. Like I mentioned, when we first do our die lines, you can do kind of abbreviated geometry. It's kind of a simple way just to start to figure out how it's going to fit. And then later on, when you get to 3D rendering, you might want to go in there and detail a little bit better or add some texture maps or surfaces or whatever needs to be done to that particular object to make it work. But it has a piece of art on it, so I just want to show that. Okay, that's the art we set up last time, so that's ready to go. That was part of our texture mapping tutorial. So this is just the rendering. So let's bring this back, and I have the point of view 6. The same lighting will work. So I'm just going to click on render zone. So here the shadows are coming in a little bit more. You can see these soft shadows. The closed box really didn't have a lot of geometry that the shadows would be needed for, except for maybe a little shadow on the deck on the that round surface. I didn't want to use that this time, but in here the shadows are on, so you can see them. It's really helping us see some of that geometry inside, and the bottle is set back, and so I think this looks pretty good. Reflective surface is a bit overwhelming, but like I said, I could back off on that under that thing. I think I'm at 20%. You could go down to like 12 and make it very subtle. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this a little bit in Photoshop, and I'm going to soften up just with the brush tool on like 25%. I'm going to soften up that shadow, make that blend a little bit. So if I do trim this and put it on a page with our images, it doesn't have any kind of a border to deal with. So again, save that out as a JPEG. There are multiple views. This particular one, let's see, I had another view, production one. You can just take a quick look at this. This is the first flap. So if you have a package that has several steps to it, open here first, open here second, and so forth, show all those steps. But that is the unboxing experience. It's very important to show that. And this has a piece of art. So as you're opening this, you see the bottle. It's emphasizing how long it lasted, 24 hours, 60 doses. And then over on the left is all this information on how to use that. That's one reason why this box was created, was to educate the consumer in an engaging way, because this is a steroidal nasal inhaler, and it can be very dangerous if you don't do it right. So that's why that yellow line is around that particular picture. You got to be very, very careful of your septum when you use this. So that was the point of this whole box, and why it was created. It was for the pharmacist to interact with the consumer, to warn them about how this works. So that's creating renderings in Form Z. It's pretty straightforward. I guess the lighting will be probably the biggest challenge, and then your material creation, and then how all that relates.